On the fog-choked morning of October 15, 2017, a 911 call pierced the stillness of Geneva, New York, just before 7 a.m. The man on the line, Daniel Whitmer, 32, a newlywed only hours into his marriage, spoke with a tone that unsettled seasoned dispatchers. Composed, clinical, flat. He stated that his wife, Emma Ralston, was unresponsive, cold, and still dressed in her wedding gown. He claimed he had just awoken and found her lifeless beside him in the bed they had entered together as husband and wife. When first responders arrived at room 418 of the Belhist Grand Hotel, a Victorian-era castle-turned-boutique resort overlooking the slate-gray waters of Seneca Lake, they found Emma's body splayed on the bed, delicate features slack in death, her fingers stiff in the folds of antique lace. The setting was grotesquely surreal. A bridal suite turned morgue, a love story terminated by dawn. And Daniel, her husband of precisely 7 hours, sat on a chaise, shirtless, dazed but not distraught. No sign of forced entry, no broken glass, no weapons, just a champagne bottle, 2 flutes, and the bitter scent of something unspeakably wrong. What followed was a case that peeled back layers of carefully constructed illusion, exposing not just the brittle bones of a marriage, but the dark cavities in a man who many had called dependable, but few had ever really known. This wasn't just a murder. It was the unmaking of a narrative, a story that, until that night, had been sold as perfect. Emma Ralston, 29, was by all accounts a generous, introspective woman whose life revolved around her students, her family, and her quiet pursuit of beauty, often expressed in the vivid brushstrokes of her classroom's art displays or in the annual mural she organized for the Canandaigua Middle School. Her colleagues described her as present, warm, and patient with chaos, while her sister, Natalie, recalled that Emma had been the glue in a family still reeling from their father's stroke in 2012. Emma met Daniel Whitmer in April 2013 through Match.com, back when dating apps were still a new frontier for cautious people. Daniel was then a financial analyst for a mid-sized firm in Syracuse, unflashy, disciplined, and introverted. He had lost his mother in a car accident at 14, a trauma he rarely spoke about, and he presented himself as a man who preferred predictability over spontaneity. They dated for over 2 years before moving in together, with friends describing the relationship as low drama, low heat. One of Emma's close friends, and Welling, would later say, "She seemed content, but I don't know if she was ever truly joyful with him." In July 2016, Daniel proposed in a quiet backyard setting. No photographers, no audience, just them and a ring she later told Lauren, her cousin and bridesmaid, looked like it had been chosen from a spreadsheet. It was a detail that seemed insignificant then, but later, everything would be reevaluated under forensic scrutiny, including the way Emma would often refer to Daniel's silences as walls. Over time, those walls appeared to grow taller. Her private journal, recovered in a tote bag after her death, contained nearly a year's worth of intermittent entries, fragments of doubt, unease, occasional mentions of the woman in the past, and, more chillingly, a sentence dated exactly 3 weeks before the wedding. "He never says no, he just drifts until I stop asking." The wedding was held on October 14th at the Belhist Castle, a venue that looks more like a painting than a real place, turrets wrapped in ivy, mist rising from the lake, and rows of white chairs facing the fall-burnished trees. It was a sizable affair, 124 guests, a live string quartet, hand-lettered menus, and a bride in a vintage, hand-altered gown of Belgian lace. On the surface, the day unfolded without incident. But in hindsight, signs of trouble had already begun to surface. Several guests noticed that Emma looked unusually tired by the second course, fidgety. In the words of her cousin Lauren, who would later testify that Emma pulled her aside around 9 p.m. and asked her, in an oddly urgent tone, whether anyone had seen Daniel leave the venue. Daniel had, in fact, disappeared from the reception for roughly 45 minutes around 10:30 p.m., a gap corroborated by his own best man, Chris Ralston, Emma's younger brother, who told police he thought Daniel had gone outside to cool off after drinking heavily. However, hotel security footage later showed Daniel exiting toward the side gardens at 10:28 p.m. and returning through a back stairwell. not the main ballroom, just before 11:15. He offered no explanation for this detour when initially questioned. As for Emma, she appeared glassy-eyed during the final dance and leaned on Daniel for support as they ascended the grand staircase toward their suite, room 418. Witnesses remember thinking it was just fatigue. What no one knew then was that Emma would never leave that room alive. The last known image of her was captured by the hallway security camera. Her eyes cast down, her mouth slightly open, Daniel beside her but not touching her. The couple entered the room at 11:25 p.m. and the door locked behind them. From that point on, the narrative belongs entirely to Daniel Whitmer, whose story, as it turned out, would unravel like a badly knotted bow tie. The suite itself was a study in contradiction when investigators entered just after 7:15 a.m., opulent and orderly, but bearing the unmistakable trace of panic held too long. Emma lay on her back, arms resting at her sides as if placed there, the lace of her gown slightly torn under the left sleeve, her face pallid, with faint discoloration around the mouth and neck. The light streaming through the tall lake-facing windows struck her hair and made her appear statuesque, ethereal, too composed for someone who had, only hours earlier, allegedly died in her sleep. Daniel met first responders at the door, half-dressed and groggy, repeatedly insisting that he'd passed out on the chaise after having a celebratory glass of champagne and had awoken to find Emma cold beside him. He said he thought she had fallen asleep and simply never woke up. But the details didn't fit. The two champagne flutes on the vanity had only one set of fingerprints, Daniel's. The bottle, half-finished, stood between them like a prop. Emma's lipstick wasn't on either glass, and her stomach contents later confirmed she hadn't consumed alcohol that night. The medical examiner's report, released 4 days later, pushed the quiet tragedy into the realm of the criminal. Cause of death was asphyxiation, consistent with manual strangulation. Bruising on Emma's neck and inner arms indicated restraint, and there were defensive wounds on her hands, specifically, a broken fingernail on the right index finger and minor abrasions on both palms. Time of death was estimated between 1:30 and 2:15 a.m., placing it roughly 2 hours after the couple had last been seen entering the suite. Toxicology returned unsettling results. Low levels of zolpidem, commonly sold as Ambien, and a trace of MDMA in Emma's system, neither of which she was prescribed or known to use. Interviews with her closest friends and family confirmed she was extremely cautious about substances, avoiding even over-the-counter sleep aids. Daniel denied any knowledge of these substances and claimed he did not see Emma take anything that evening. But questions about his own consumption began to mount. A search of his toiletry bag revealed a single blister pack of Ambien with 4 tablets missing, prescribed not to Daniel, but to a former girlfriend, Ashley Conway, a name that appeared casually in one of Emma's journal entries from August as still lurking around the edges. It was Lauren, Emma's cousin, who told investigators that Emma had expressed concern earlier that day, hours before the ceremony. She had allegedly seen someone at the hotel she wasn't supposed to see, someone who made her stomach turn. Lauren initially dismissed it as pre-wedding jitters, but the statement took on darker significance when hotel registry records confirmed that Ashley Conway had checked into room 307 the night of the wedding, under her own name, booking only a single night. When police brought this to Daniel, he stated he had no idea Ashley was there, that he had not spoken to her in over a year, and claimed her presence was a bizarre coincidence. But hotel surveillance footage would soon contradict him. Reviewing the hallway feeds, investigators observed a woman matching Ashley's appearance, confirmed later through facial recognition, walking toward room 418 just after 12:19 a.m., remaining inside for 24 minutes, and leaving again at 12:43. She carried no purse, no visible phone, and moved with an ease that didn't suggest someone trying to avoid being seen. When questioned, Ashley initially told investigators she was attending a wine event nearby and was unaware of the wedding. But under pressure and shown the footage, she changed her story. She admitted Daniel had invited her to catch up privately, that he told her Emma had passed out early, and that they talked briefly before she left. Her demeanor in interviews was cold, precise, and notably lacking in shock. She claimed Emma had been asleep when she entered and never stirred. However, forensics complicated her version. A second wine glass was found in the suite's bedside drawer, wiped mostly clean but bearing a partial fingerprint later matched to Ashley. DNA evidence under Emma's broken fingernail contained epithelial skin matching Ashley's sample, a piece of evidence that placed the two women in direct, physical contact. Meanwhile, Emma's phone, which Daniel claimed to have never seen after the wedding, was discovered 2 days later in a hotel laundry cart. Once unlocked through a family iCloud backup, its messages added an eerie urgency to the timeline. A text sent to Lauren at 11:01 p.m. read, "If anything happens to me tonight, ask Lauren about the jacket pocket." That pocket, belonging to Emma's bridal robe and collected as evidence, held a folded sheet of paper with 3 names: Daniel, Ashley, room 307. The next clue came from a draft in Emma's notes app timestamped at 11:04 p.m., apparently unsent. "His ex is here, room 307. She smiled at me." That was the last activity on Emma's phone. It was now clear that Emma had seen Ashley at the wedding and likely recognized her. The confrontation, whatever form it took, had happened behind the sealed door of room 418. 2 women, 1 man, and 7 hours before a bride was found dead in white satin beside the man who now claimed he'd slept through it all. The gap between appearance and reality, between what Daniel said and what the evidence screamed, had become too wide to bridge. The story, once a soft-focus romance, had begun to tear at the seams, revealing not just a fatal collision of past and present, but a chilling intimacy with deception. By the time the case went before a grand jury in March of 2018, 5 months after Emma's death, the narrative had hardened into something far darker than a tragedy. It was now a story of betrayal executed with meticulous calculation, cloaked in the illusion of a wedding night. Daniel Whitmer was indicted on 1 count of second-degree murder and 2 counts of tampering with evidence. Prosecutors argued that he had conspired, either explicitly or implicitly, with Ashley Conway to neutralize Emma, whether by chemical sedation or physical restraint, and that her death had not been a moment of passion or panic, but rather the culmination of weeks, perhaps months, of growing resolve. Surveillance footage from the Belhus Castle became one of the most damning pieces of circumstantial evidence. Ashley walking calmly to room 418, Daniel disappearing for over 45 minutes during the reception, and finally, what investigators called the black window, the 2-hour period between 11:30 p.m. and 1:30 a.m., during which no movement occurred outside the suite, no calls were made, no staff entered or exited. And yet a healthy, sober, fully conscious bride ended up dead. Daniel's defense leaned heavily on ambiguity. His attorney argued that no one witnessed a struggle, no motive had been proven, and that Ashley's presence, while suspicious, could not directly implicate Daniel without assuming a coordinated plan, of which no written or spoken communication had been recovered. But Emma's journal entries, the text to Lauren, and the note in her robe pocket were presented as preemptive witness statements from a woman who had sensed something deeply wrong. The prosecution painted Daniel as a man emotionally hollowed out by a lifetime of controlled appearances, a man who could not face divorce or confrontation, and instead opted to silently erase a problem he no longer had the bandwidth to manage. The theory was chilling, that Daniel had drugged Emma with a tainted glass of champagne laced with Ambien, possibly administered earlier in the evening under the guise of celebration. That Ashley was summoned to assist in ensuring Emma remained unconscious or pliable, and that during or after this encounter, Emma had partially awakened, prompting an act of sudden, decisive violence. The bruises on her arms, the broken fingernail, and the scratches on her palms all suggested a brief but violent attempt to resist. Ashley Conway was never charged in Emma's death. Her testimony granted partial immunity in exchange for cooperation, but she remained an indelible figure in the case, a woman who may have stood by or even helped as another woman died, her presence inexplicably woven into the final moments of a wedding that should have marked the start of a new life. When Daniel finally took the stand in his own defense, a rare and desperate move, he appeared worn, thinner, emotionally hollow. He denied everything. He denied seeing Ashley that night, denied knowing how the Ambien got into Emma's system, denied even hearing a sound as his wife died inches from him. But the jury took only 9 hours to deliberate. On March 29, 2018, Daniel Whitmer was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years to life. The courtroom, packed with Emma's family and friends, remained eerily quiet as the verdict was read. No cheers, no cries, just a long-held breath finally exhaled. In the months following, questions continued to swirl. About why Emma had stayed with a man she had clearly grown to fear. About whether Ashley's role had truly ended where she claimed it did. And about the strange, clinical coldness Daniel maintained throughout every stage of the investigation. Emma's parents established a memorial scholarship for aspiring art teachers in her name, while the Canandaigua Middle School dedicated a hallway mural in her honor, a patchwork of vivid, student-painted wings spanning the entire wall. And in Geneva, the Belhust Castle quietly remodeled its bridal suite, retiring room 418 from service entirely. Yet for those closest to Emma, the room and what it held remain inescapable. A reminder that the most devastating betrayals don't happen in back alleys or darkened streets, but in silk-draped beds, behind locked doors, and sometimes with champagne still fizzing in the glass.